The Titanic lies at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean right now, and we know exactly where it is. We've sent down cameras, submarines, even tourists. We've seen it. But strangely, no one has ever brought it back to the surface. It seems like the most obvious move, doesn't it? The world's most famous ship sitting on the ocean floor. Why not raise it, turn it into a museum, charge admission, and make a fortune? People have tried. Over the last century, engineers, billionaires, and salvage companies have proposed dozens of plans to raise the Titanic. Some were creative, some were completely absurd, and all of them have failed. But why? The Titanic rests around 12,500 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic. That's more than 2.5 miles straight down. To put that in perspective, if you stacked the Empire State Building 8 times, it still wouldn't reach the wreck. At that depth, the pressure is around 6,000 pounds per square inch, which is about 400 times the pressure you feel standing on the beach right now. If you were down there, your lungs would collapse instantly. A regular submarine hull would crumple like a soda can. In June of 2023, the Titan submersible tragically proved the consequences of that pressure. Carrying 5 people to visit the Titanic wreck, the sub suffered a catastrophic implosion. The carbon fiber hull collapsed in an instant, killing everyone on board. The force was so extreme that the entire vessel was reduced to fragments scattered across the ocean floor. That's what 6,000 pounds per square inch does to a purpose-built deep-sea submersible. Now imagine trying to raise an entire ship under those same conditions. How could you possibly attach cables, rig lifting equipment, or lift an entire wreck in the dark, freezing waters 2.5 miles below the surface? But let's say you could solve the pressure problem. Let's say you built equipment that could withstand that immense depth. You still have the problem of weight. The Titanic displaces 52,000 tons. That's the weight of roughly 36,000 cars. No crane on Earth can lift that. No cable system has ever been built that could handle that kind of load, let alone from that depth. The tensile strength required doesn't exist in any material we currently manufacture. Even if you somehow managed to generate enough force to lift it, the ship itself would fall apart the moment you tried. Why? Because the Titanic isn't resting there in one piece. It broke in half as it sank. The bow and the stern are separated by about 2,000 feet of ocean floor. The bow still looks surprisingly intact in photographs, but the stern, it's a twisted, compressed pile of steel that's barely recognizable. Even the bow, which appears solid, is incredibly fragile. After more than a century underwater, the steel has been weakened by corrosion. Entire sections of the railing have collapsed, and the decks are buckling inward. If you attached cables and tried to pull the ship up, it wouldn't rise, it would disintegrate. But that hasn't stopped people from trying some truly outlandish ideas. One famous proposal suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls, millions of them. The idea was that these tiny air-filled balls would create enough buoyancy to float the ship to the surface. It sounds clever, but there's a catch. At 6,000 pounds per square inch, every single ping pong ball would be crushed flat the moment it hit that depth, completely useless. Other ideas were equally inventive. One suggested injecting the ship's hull with petroleum jelly to displace the water and create buoyancy. Another suggested encasing the Titanic in a giant block of ice. Scientists calculated that to make that work, you'd need 500,000 tons of liquid nitrogen, which is, to put it mildly, impractical. Then there was the idea inspired by Clive Cussler's 1976 novel Raise the Titanic. In the book, the hero patches up the ship's hull, fills it with compressed air, and the Titanic rockets to the surface like a submarine blowing its ballast tanks. A thrilling scene in the book, but here's the problem. The Titanic didn't sink in one piece. Even if it had, compressed air at that depth would require pressures no hull could withstand. None of these ideas would work, not even close. But someone did manage to bring part of the Titanic to the surface. In 1994, a company called RMS Titanic Incorporated discovered a massive section of the ship's hull lying in the debris field. It was a piece of the starboard side, about the size of a bus, with 4 portholes intact. They called it the big piece. The plan was to attach flotation bags, fill them with diesel, and slowly raise the 15-ton section to the surface. Thousands of people lined up to watch the big piece rise from the depths. It started ascending, the bags broke the surface, and then a hurricane hit. The storm snapped the cables, and the 15-ton section fell back to the ocean floor. The mission was abandoned. But 2 years later, in 1998, they tried again with new plans and better equipment. This time, when the big piece surfaced, it stayed. The section was carefully pulled onto a recovery vessel and is now on permanent display at the Titanic exhibition in Las Vegas, where over 22 million people have come to see it. But here's the reality. It took 4 years, 2 full expeditions, millions of dollars, and more luck than skill to raise a single 15-ton piece. And that's just one small section. The full ship weighs over 52,000 tons. Over the years, salvage teams have recovered more than 5,500 artifacts from the wreck site: plates, jewelry, coins, even a violin. But these all came from the debris field, scattered between the two halves of the ship. No one has been able to recover anything from inside the hull itself. However, while humans argue over what to save and how, something else is quietly eating away at the Titanic: rusticles. These are strange, icicle-like formations made of rust. They're created by bacteria that feed on iron. They latch onto the steel, consume it, and leave behind these fragile tubes that crumble to dust when touched. The Titanic is slowly being consumed by Halomonas titanicae, a species of bacteria discovered in the rusticles in 2010. This bacteria is specifically adapted to feed on the ship's steel, and it's estimated that the Titanic loses hundreds of pounds of iron every day. The hull is growing thinner, support beams are weakening, and entire sections of the deck have already collapsed. At the current rate of decay, researchers believe the Titanic could be completely gone within 20 to 30 years. Some say it may last a century, but regardless, the ship is vanishing piece by piece, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Some think that's the way it should be. After all, the Titanic is a grave site. More than 1,500 people died when it sank on the 15th of April, 1912. Most of them never made it out, and their bodies were never recovered. The wreck site is a mass grave, and some argue that it should remain undisturbed, not turned into a tourist attraction. In 1985, when Robert Ballard first discovered the Titanic, his reaction wasn't one of celebration. After the excitement, he and his crew held a moment of silence above the wreck. The bodies are gone, consumed by the ocean, but their shoes remain. Scattered across the debris field, exactly where passengers fell, are shoes. They didn't decompose because leather is resistant to sea creatures. That's what remains: shoes. A mother's shoes next to her daughter's. That's all that's left. In 2012, the United Nations officially declared the Titanic wreck a protected site, and the United States and the United Kingdom ratified a treaty to regulate who can visit the wreck and what can be removed. The wreck is treated with the same respect as a cemetery because, in truth, that's what it is. So, why hasn't the Titanic been raised? Because we can't. The pressure at that depth is too intense. The ship is too heavy, too fragile, and too decayed. But also, because maybe we shouldn't. The Titanic holds the memories of those who perished. Maybe the most fitting tribute is to leave it in peace, slowly returning to the ocean it fell into, a symbol of the tragedy, but also of the passage of time.